Democratic Club, let's hear it. Anybody who has ever taught an education knows that the students who sit in the front are the most interested, committed people to the cause. This crowd tonight, everybody's in the back of the room, and they're out in the patio. They probably would feel better, but please feel free. Isn't that true?
Jack J, not everybody is in the back. We do have a young person.
Yeah, this guy gets an A to start with, so don't go there. Automatic to start with. Tonight's event is sponsored, of course, by the Santa Monica Democratic Club, that's put on some terrific programs here in the city. It plays a major role in city politics, as well as what's going on in the state of California. It's co-sponsored by the Santa Monica College Public Policy Institute, the Santa Monica Daily Press newspaper, and the Santa Monica Chamber of Commerce Education Committee. And we thank the folks who provided the refreshments from the Huntley Hotel, because that would be is very helpful. At this point, because I think that we want to spend all the time that we can on the panel, I want to introduce the panel chairperson for the evening, Ben Allen, a member of our board of directors of the club. Ben, give us a wave so we know who you are. Please welcome Ben, a great panel, and we'll get into the show.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jake. Well, this is a real pleasure. I have two little business announcements to make first. The first thing is that I cajoled my good friend Ken Feingold, who's one of the alumni members of the Board of Regents, UC Board of Regents. But he said he was only coming on one condition, and that's that we not announce the World Series results, because he is TiVoing them at home. So, out of respect for those of you who may be recording Game 6 of this critical World Series between two fantastic historic franchises, unfortunately not including the Dodgers, please decline from letting everyone know what the score is. The second is an important announcement, and it has to do with community colleges. And I want to make the point, we're going to be talking a lot about higher education issues today, focused particularly at the four-year and graduate program, the university system. The community colleges play a critical role in the California Master Plan, in the scheme that was established, and they also are a vitally important link in access to a whole series of careers, and also to the four-year college system, four-year university system. We realized through the process of putting the panel together that the issues involved in community colleges are so important, and there's a unique set of challenges that we're actually looking to put on a panel specifically focused on community college challenges sometime in the coming year. So please be on the lookout for that. We've already got several great speakers lined up for that panel. We'll look at both the unique challenges here at Santa Monica College, but then also looking more broadly at some of the issues facing community colleges statewide. So please be on the lookout for that, and I thank everyone who's participated in that conversation so that we can have a great panel coming up on community colleges. So, without further ado, I wanted to introduce this fantastic panel. I'm so proud to have a really kind of generationally diverse, ethnically diverse, professionally diverse group of folks sitting up here, all of whom bring a great deal of expertise to this whole question of university access and affordability. And I'm hoping that we'll have an opportunity to get into a robust discussion about the state of four-year higher ed and University of California, in particular in the Cal State University, and where the master plan goes from here. So we've got four fantastic people, and I think what I'm going to do is I'll introduce them individually. Each of them will have a couple of minutes to give some thoughts, and then we'll open up to a discussion among ourselves, and then open up for a discussion from the audience. But we're hoping to cover a couple different issues. One of them has to do with the ever-increasing cost of a four-year degree in our public system. How much is the public university system getting out of reach for young Californians? One of the things that the university likes to do is raise tuition and put some of the increased tuition dollars into financial aid. Is the word getting out enough? Is there still a sticker shock effect, or is it important for us is it good for us to have a high fee, high aid model? Or is that a bad thing? Another big question, of course, is about the master plan. Written in 1960, it was written to establish a system for higher education in California, in particular reflect the diversity of the state. And then, of course, the question of community colleges and that critical link, the transfer issue from community colleges. One of the things that always continues to concern me as a school board member is that we have so many of our students right here from Santa Monica, Malibu, who go to community college. We have a wonderful relationship with Santa Monica College. We also have a lot of students who go to El Camino, West LA College, and several other colleges in the area. But it's really depressing how few of the students who go to community college saying that they want to transfer to a four-year school end up transferring to a four-year school afterwards. And that is a weak link in the, that transfer rate is a problem that we're all focused on and concerned about, and I hope we have a chance to talk about tonight as well. I also love to talk about quality. One of the things that we're so proud of is this high caliber education system. We've got a high caliber community college right here. The UC system has traditionally been second to none in research universities around, public research university systems around the world. We have an excellent Cal State system that has played such a critical role, particularly in feeding new teachers into our system. But is quality there? Where's the commitment to quality moving forward? Do all the budget cuts, does this change in our financial model impact quality as we move forward? So I'm hoping we'll get a chance to talk about all these issues, get an opportunity to really delve into these tough questions. And without further ado, I'll start on the very far right. That's not a political commentary, but with Michele Siqueiros, who's a really fantastic person I've gotten to know through several different things, including the Latino-Jewish dialogue at the Anti-Defamation League. Michele is the executive director of the Campaign for College Opportunity right here in LA. She's the senior project coordinator with the Department of Neighborhood Empowerment for the City of Los Angeles, founding program manager for Public Allies LA, and assistant director of constituency services for the National Association of Latino Elected and Appointed Officials Education Fund. In November 2011, Michele was appointed to the California Student Aid Commission by Governor Jerry Brown. And from 2005 to 2010, she served as an appointee of Mayor Antonio Villaraigosa on the Board of Neighborhoods overseeing the citywide system of neighborhood councils. She currently serves on the boards of the Institute of Higher Education Policy, the Alliance for a Better Community, and the Pitzer College Alumni, and does a lot of work on these questions of access and affordability for students in California. So love to hear from you, Michele.
Thank you, Ben. And just a quick note, I don't actually currently hold all those jobs or positions right now. As Ben noted, I am the executive director of the Campaign for College Opportunity, and our mission and focus is really to increase the number of Californians that go to college and complete college. So we've spent a lot of time sort of being advocates in Sacramento and the Capitol, and advocates for funding, as well as advocates to ensure that actually our colleges do a better job at serving students. So I'll touch a little bit on that. But I think I'm going to wear more my California Student Aid Commissioner hat as I talk about some of these issues of affordability. But also I think none of us can kind of disassociate our own personal experience. You know, I grew up here in Los Angeles. My mother was a seamstress, immigrant from Mexico, had a 6th grade education. But she knew that if I got an education, I'd have a lot more opportunities than she did. And thankfully, I had a lot of folks that believed in me, supported me, helped guide me, and a particular counselor that armed me with information for how to respond to my mom's question when I asked her for her social security number and all of her tax information so that I could fill out that very long, complicated FAFSA, the Free Financial Aid Form. Thankfully, you know, I was able to get aid, and I went to college because I got a Cal grant from the state of California. I got a Pitzer grant from Pitzer College where I went for undergrad, and I got subsidized federal student loans that made my 4-year bachelor degree education possible. So when I was appointed to the California Student Aid Commission, I came from that lens and that experience of you know, I wouldn't have been there had it not been for all of the support that the state of California puts forward. So when Ben invited me to talk about this, I thought I would share a few facts and information. I think it's not news to anybody here in this room or across the nation that tuition and fees have skyrocketed over the last few years. Certainly in California since 2009 as a result of the budget cuts. You know, the legislature and the governor have appropriated less money for higher education. As a result, institutions have found themselves at either a point of do they cut programs and staffing and faculty to the bare bones, or do they help bring in additional resources through fees and tuition? So as you can see, they've done both. They've cut faculty, courses, and facilities to the bone, and then they've raised tuition and fees. So I think what's most disturbing is that students are paying more but not necessarily getting more, right? When we go to a fancy restaurant, we expect a much better meal. In this case, that's certainly not necessarily happening. I think the huge conversation and interest is around the growing student debt nationally, right? How that's really surpassed all kinds of debt now in our country. So that's a huge concern for all of us, and that's also grown in California. So there's been a huge increase. We're only about a third of students that went to higher education in California took out loans. After 2000, by 2010, half of the students that go to higher ed today take out loans. So we've seen a huge jump. We've also seen that the average loan that students take out is significantly higher, about a 30 to 38% jump. Now those are averages. These are very different depending on what institutions students are attending, right? Students that are going to public four-year universities here in California actually take the least amount of student loans out. And students that go to for-profit colleges charge a lot, take significant amount of loan out. The good news is on average in California, the student debt is only about $16,000. And that's significantly lower than the national average, which is over $22,000. So I want to share that because there is kind of, as we know that there's challenges in California, there's also a lot of really good news. Primarily the reason that student debt in our state is significantly lower than any other state is because we have a really robust statewide Cal Grant aid program. Cal Grants provide, there's $1.5 billion in Cal Grants that are awarded to students. It is the #1, so I think we're in one educational position in the country, we rank #1, and it's in the amount of dollars spent on student financial aid. And I think that's promising. And even when the governor, even this governor, when he proposed cuts to Cal Grant, the legislature and others, including myself as his appointee, really went to bat against the cuts to Cal Grant aid. And part of the challenge, I think, for all of us will be to continue to ensure that Cal Grant aid is attainable, that it's linked to tuition and fees, so as tuition and fees go up, we've guaranteed that the Cal Grant aid is gonna match that. Now there's problems with Cal Grants, and I'll maybe speak to that a little bit later in terms of, we're still not meeting all financially needy, students in terms of their aid. For community college students in particular, there's, I think, a huge challenge in providing them sufficient aid so that they can go to school full-time and actually have all their costs covered. But I think there is some really good news to at least start this conversation off with, and I think there's going to be lots of work for all of us to do in terms of making sure that we don't lose ground and that we actually try and do a better job as our economy recovers.
Thank you so much. We'll be hearing more from Michele as the night goes on, but I'd now like to introduce Dayen, who's a political writer and blogger, and spent 3 years writing for the Fire Dog Lake News Desk. He's also written for the New Republic, Washington Monthly, American Prospect, Salon, Democracy Journal, Pacific Standard, National Memo, and the Washington Independent, as well as multiple well-trafficked progressive blogs and websites. His work's been cited in the LA Times, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post. He's been a guest on MSNBC, Al Jazeera, English, Current TV, Russia Today, NPR, Pacific Radio, Air America. He's a great guy. He's also, so he lives right here in Los Angeles, and he's written a lot of interesting stuff about this affordability issue. And we wanted to have a journalist perspective, a blogger's perspective, and been very impressed with David's work and asked him to come in and share some of his thoughts with us today.
Well, thank you for having me here. I appreciate it. As a former Santa Monica resident for about 6-7 years, now I'm just south in Benson. So Michele talked, and that was great, about particularly about the numbers in California and how they relate to the national numbers on student debt. I think there's one statistic and one study actually that really brought home to me what we're doing in terms of the finance system that we've set up now to pay for college. And that's a study that was done in April of this year by the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. And the Federal Reserve Bank of New York took a look at student debt. First, this was one of the first to show that student debt cumulatively is over $1 trillion in this country. So it's higher than any debt except for mortgage debt. But the really intriguing part of their study is they took a look at people aged 30, and they looked at whether or not they had a mortgage and whether or not they had a car loan. And what they found is that for people 30 years of age, if you had a student loan, you are less likely to have a mortgage at age 30 than if you don't have a student loan. And they found the same thing for a car loan. Now, this is a completely paradoxical result that they found here, because if you have a student loan, you are someone who has financed your education, you are there's some likelihood that you're a college graduate, relative to someone who does not have a student loan, where you would be more likely to not have attended college at all or have left at some point. That correlates directly to income. We know that even if you take some college, you are guaranteed to have a higher income than if you take no college at all. So why is this happening? Why is it more likely that you have a mortgage if you don't take out a student loan than if you do? And the answer, of course, is that the debt burden is now having such an effect on these kids, college graduates coming out, that they delay purchases of large items like a car or a house. And this is having and the New York Federal Reserve Board found that they concluded this is having a damaging effect on our economy. And so the method by which we are financing higher education in this country is actually having a deleterious effect on our economy. And that is a central problem that we have to figure out at this point. Of course, as you said, it's between $22,000 and $26,000 that people are coming out of college with in debt. I was at a panel a couple months ago, and it was on the student debt crisis, and they asked everyone in the room who had a student loan, and everyone raised their hand, and do you have $10,000? Everyone's hand stayed up. Do you have $20,000? Half the room, their hands were still up. $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, $100,000. There are just crushing burdens. So we're telling kids at 18 years old that you have a choice to make. If you want to realize the promise of a higher education and everything that comes along with that, which affects your entire earning potential throughout your entire life, you're going to have to be burdened by this inescapable debt. And we can talk about what student loans are. They're not loans. They're some form of indenture, actually, is what they are. You can't discharge them in bankruptcy. You cannot refinance them. You can't. You can have your wages garnished. You can have your Social Security payments garnished on your student debt. And that's actually happening more and more. More and more seniors have student debt that's accumulated from when they were 20, 25, 30 years. So we're telling these kids that in order to get this, they're going to have to manage this large debt and also manage the rest of your life. And it's kind of a rotten bargain that we're putting on kids, and it doesn't really need to happen that way. I mean, there are studies out there that show that all of the money that we use to help with financing for higher education, if it was channeled in a different way, could probably pay for free higher education for large segments of the public. So, at least in the public realm. So, these are really knotty issues, and they do require some serious discussion. Obviously, California being sort of ground zero for where public education was seen as something to bolster our economy. The master plan was really a way to ensure that we had a high-powered, highly educated workforce for the future in California, and that we would continue to drive innovation. So if we're now creating a situation where the very financing system for education is holding back our economy, that is exactly the opposite of what we need to be doing. So hopefully we'll get to some more robust discussion of this as we go on. And thanks for having me again.
Thank you so much. All right, well, our next panelist is Kareem Arif, who's Arif. Okay, Kareem Arif. When I served as a student member of the Board of Regents, I got the opportunity to work very closely with the University of California Students Association, which is a body that engages all the student governments from all across the UC system, both at the graduate and the undergraduate level. And the president of the system is one of the most important advocates on behalf of public higher education students in the state. And Kareem holds this really important position this year. He's a third-year student at UC Riverside, where he studies psychology and law and society. So go Highlanders. He worked extensively in student government as a fellow for UCR's External Affairs Office, UCSA's Secretary and Finance Officer, and also as a member of Riverside's Lobby Corps, which is a group that goes to lobby legislators both in Sacramento and locally. He's fought for more funding for education, reduced funding for state prisons, and also lobbied with the Corps for a tax on oil companies in California, and more student representation at UC Regents meetings in the form of Prop 13, which sets a percentage limit on the real estate tax. So we're really appreciative of Kareem coming in. He actually drove all the way from Riverside to attend this event, so we really appreciate you braving LA traffic.
Thank you for having me. I'm really happy to be here. I got to spend some time at UCLA's campus a little bit earlier, so not too bad of a day. So I have a couple of things I want to mention. I was jotting stuff down. Essentially, as Ben said, this UCSA represents 220,000 students across the UC. So my job is essentially to constantly advocate and make sure I'm at Regents meetings, I'm talking with the governor, I'm speaking with legislators to ensure that we're getting the funding we need, we're getting the support we need, and the students are really given the opportunity to succeed in higher education, which is kind of a crazy idea these days. It's kind of weird. So I'm listening to everyone speak before me, and I was reminded of a game. I don't know if anyone's familiar with the game of life, that board game that you started. And I remember I always used to play that with my family. And when we would start, there were two options. You could either go to college or you could start your career. And every time, without fail, I would go to college and I would fail, and I would always lose the game. And it was ridiculous. And I was saying, well, the one time I didn't go to college, I won the game. And so I thought, well, this can't be the same way for real life. And so being someone who is now in my third year of education and sitting on $40,000 worth of debt, looking to go to law school in the next 3 years, which will probably triple, if not quadruple that debt, it's kind of interesting how this game seems to be applicable. So working with students, we have a lot of different ways that we're trying to combat a lot of these problems to increase our diversity, to increase our, to make our system more affordable, and to make sure that we have more accessibility for the system. So I'll talk a little bit about some of the campaigns that UCSA is pushing this year, some of the ideas students have brought up to really push the ideas of UC, and we can talk about that a little bit later. If anyone has any questions, I'm more than happy to go into those. Our first campaign was a graduate and professional campaign, Jobs, which is centered around our graduate students. And the idea is that in today's economy, there simply aren't the academic jobs for graduate students to go into once they graduate. So you're graduating with a PhD or a master's, and you have nowhere to go because there simply aren't the tenure track jobs that you need, and you're almost frowned upon or looked upon as less than what you are if you try to go outside of academia for a profession. And so this campaign is all about creating those extra resources for these students so that they can actually move out into the real world outside of academia as necessary, because there simply aren't enough jobs out there in academia for them to get them. And if they are, it's through adjunct professorships and not through tenured staff faculty. So that's one of our campaigns. Our undergraduates selected 3 campaigns, the first of which is the California Modernization and Economic Development Act. And the idea behind this is to create an oil extraction tax. Now, this is a type of tax that we see in Texas, we see it in Alaska, and it's used to essentially help fund higher education. And it's something that California doesn't do, whereas the other top 10 states in the nation do use this type of tax. And so it seemed almost counterintuitive that California, being at the forefront, being ground zero, doesn't have this extra funding mechanism for the system. So that's something that we're trying to push on 2 levels, the grassroots level and through the legislature. We'll see how that goes. Our next initiative is the fossil-free UC tax. Currently the UC has holdings in fossil fuels, which is completely unsustainable. And just looking at the track of those holdings in the past 20 years, had we had our holdings in almost anywhere else, we would have made more money. We are losing money based on our holdings in an unsustainable field. So that's something that students really want to pull out of and change that. The final campaign is our Ignite campaign. Now, this stemmed out of the FIRE campaign, so these acronyms, I was amazed when they did them. The FIRE campaign stood for Fight Incarceration, Reclaim Education. Okay? Then they came in and they evolved this campaign into the Ignite campaign, which stands for Invest in Graduation, Not Incarceration, Transform Education. Yeah. And so I was amazed when they came out with that. Shoot, man, they did a good job with that. But, so the idea with this campaign, it's twofold. It has a repeal of Prop 209 aspect to it, which essentially banned affirmative action. And so they want to make sure that this can come back in because that's limiting diversity at our UC campuses. It's creating an issue with accessibility, and so they definitely want to focus on that. It also has this prison reform campaign, prison reform aspect to it, which essentially, if you look at the funding for higher education and for corrections over the past several years, you will see an astounding correlation between as higher education goes down, corrections goes up. And it's almost the exact same percentage. It is ridiculous how obvious it is that we're divesting from education and investing in incarceration, essentially. And so this is something that students are really trying to push so that we can get that money back into education, get these students in there, fight the school-to-prison pipeline where students are being pushed out of the classroom and into the prison system, and people who are released from prison can't even get into education, and they end up being forced into a recidivism because they have no other options out there for them. So that's another aspect. We also have our Fund the UC campaign, which is institutionalized. That's something we work on every year, and that's where we focus primarily on Prop 13 reform, which, as was said, Prop 13 caps the property tax at 1970s level, and it's creating a loophole for corporations like Disneyland to essentially take advantage of these property taxes where they're paying cents on the acre, where that money should be coming in and should be used to fund higher education or should be used for other things. So those are a couple issues that we're tackling essentially. I think it's very alarming to me that we can claim that $16,000 in loans is good news. That's scary. That is really scary. That we're talking about people who are 18 who have yet to make, even a quarter of that in many cases, even any fraction of that number, and we're graduating with 16 grand, and that is considered good news. That's problematic. Student loan debt in itself is very problematic. We need to figure out a way to reform this because students are being taken advantage of. And at public universities, we're supposed to be providing an affordable education. So I'll wrap up with the idea that a public university, by definition, is one that the state pays more into than the students. Okay? By definition, the UC is no longer a public university. By definition, UC students put more into their education than the state does. That's a shame, and that's something we need to fix. Thank you for having me.
I know a lot of you know that this really disturbing stat when you talk about prisons, that the best indicator for long-term prison construction needs. So we actually base our decisions on our prison construction needs 20 years out based on current second grade literacy levels. It's so predictive. It's so predictive that public social planners have been able to take that under the bank and make their prison decisions based on the current second grade literacy rates. Well, there you go. All right. So thank you so much, Kareem. Now we'll have a chance to hear from a member of the University of California's Board of Regents and a friend of mine, a fantastic regent at Eddie Island, who's a retired attorney and an executive. Prior to his retirement in 1998, Mr. Allen served as Vice President for McDonnell Douglas Corporation, where he led the Law, Intellectual Property, and Government Affairs departments through his tenure. And previously, he served as Assistant General Counsel for the Pacific Enterprises Corporation for 24 years, where he handled issues related to both state and federal regulatory law. He's been a member and treasurer of the California Science Center Board and chairman of the McDonnell Douglas Corporation Employees Community Fund. His JD is from Harvard Law School, and he was appointed in 2005 to his 12-year term as a regent. But I'll also say that Eddie has been probably the most important voice on the regents on the issue of diversity, and has been I think a positive thorn in the side of many people in the leadership, asking questions about admissions and diversity in the university system. And we welcome you, Eddie.
Thank you, David. First, let me say that my appearance here tonight and my comments are my own. I'm not appearing on behalf of the university, but I do think some of the remarks I will make are factual in nature and they're easy enough for you to check. Yes, there is concern about the level of costs to attend college in California, and there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of angst around this. And I want to give you some data to help you put it in context. How much does it cost per year to go to UC? I'll tell you straight out: $32,400 a year. 13,200 of that amount is in tuition and fees. The rest is in room and board, living expenses. California is one of the most expensive places in the world to live. So if you were to roll back tuition to the level that existed in 2008, roughly $6,200 a year, you'd be looking at an annual cost of $25,000 a year, roughly. Let me give you some data about how students afford the University of California. 2/3 of our students qualify for Pell Grants. 2/3 receive some form of aid. Let me correct that. 2/3 of our students receive some form of aid. 42% of our students qualify for Pell Grants. That's an important number. It's important because it should tell you then that 42% of our students come from families with income of $50,000 or less. I'm very proud of that fact. University of California leads all other public institutions in the admission and the graduation of students from working class and poor families. I'm very proud of that. We are doing a great job there. More work to do for sure, but we are admitting and fostering and graduating a large number of working class kids. I remind people that from time to time there's genius in America. Perhaps our founding fathers and their conceptualizing of the Constitution was a thing of genius. I think the California Master Plan for Education is a thing of genius as well. The idea is that any student desiring of higher education has an opportunity to get it. The entry portal can be a community college and a subsequent transfer to Cal State or to the University of California. Or a student could go directly to Cal State or directly to the University of California. Now, it's true that in the late 50s and early 60s, higher education was essentially free. That no longer was feasible. The taxpayers decided otherwise, and our politicians decided otherwise. When we talk about the level of student debt, I at the University of California, the average student graduates with loans at about $19,800. Paying that back over 2 years, it's roughly $220 a month. You have to ask yourself then, how does a UC education work? Well, we know that a student with a college degree will earn $1 million more over his working career than a person without it. How much should that individual contribute to the opportunity to have income, high income in our society? I don't want to suggest by my comments that I think rising tuition is necessarily a good thing. But we ought to keep it in some fair context. Poor students in California can go to UC. The average per capita grant, gift grant, to a UC freshman is roughly $29,000. A lot of people don't know that. Through Pell Grants, the Cal Grants, and the robust scholarship aid provided by the university, a student is left with somewhere around $4,000 or $5,000 a year to cover. They cover it through loans, and we expect also that they would participate in work study. Now, between 2008 and 2011, tuition roughly doubled at the University of California. At the same time, state support declined by $900 million, 27%. So what did the university do? First, it attempted very aggressive cost cutting at the administrative level. It undertook programs of purchasing efficiency, management efficiency. And in fact, over the last 4 or 5 years, we've wrung out $500 million approximately. But we still have a substantial shortfall. So what do? We turn to increasing student tuition and student fees. Now, what we have is generally described as a high tuition, high aid model. If you need help, it's there. There is no financial barrier to a young person going to the University of California. It's true, that person will graduate with some debt. And I'm not suggesting that $19,800 in debt is a small thing. But in the context of the opportunity provided by college education, I suggest that that debt might be very well worth it. I hope tonight we'll have some dialogue about why the cost is as high as it is. Sure, there's been a decline in state support, but everything else has gone up too. The bulk of the cost of the university happens to be in its employee salaries. The university employs 160,000 people. Those folks have families, mortgages, children. They expect a fair wage. So we've got to manage that aspect of costs. We've also got to manage what the whole deal, which is the quality of the institution. The University of California is perhaps the leading public university in the world. We can do some things that would reduce costs, but it certainly would also reduce quality. We could increase student-faculty ratio, for example. We could save substantial money doing that. But that's a quality metric. Some folks think that we can more aggressively pursue distance learning. we're looking at that. There may be some efficiencies there. But online education is not the salvation that people think it is. It's going to cost money to set it up and operate it. And I must say, when you talk to students about their feeling about it, they generally do not support it. Students want face time with professors. They want the opportunity for the quality of education that students before them got. And they don't think that's going to prevail with distant learning, online learning. So we're looking at that and we're having to wrestle with that. So Ben, I'll stop now. Hopefully over the course of the next hour or so, I can provide more of the cost data, more of the financial aid data, and perhaps any thoughts or ideas people might have about how to address the quality metric as it influences and drives costs.
Thank you. Just to clarify, when you say that the average student loan debt is $19,800, I assume that you mean average of any student, not just the people receiving financial aid?
The average of students who borrow at UC is $19,800.
Okay.
And I should add, that's principal. That does not include financing costs. That does not include the interest costs.
The financing cost is roughly 6%, which is the student loan rate, so that's an addition.
Right. And if you come out of school and it happens to be a giant recession and you can't get a job, you have to finance those costs over a larger time horizon.
That's right.
So.
That's certainly correct.
So I'm glad you jumped in, David, because I assume that as you've heard your fellow panelists, you have burning things you want to bring up or things you want to disagree with, agree with, expound upon. So if there's any kind of burning issue that any of the four of you want to make sure that you get in there before we start with questions, I'd love to give you that opportunity.
Well, Manny, I mean, I do think it is important to point out that, you know, we have this unfortunate circumstance over the last few years where people coming out of school have got the bad ticket in the lottery. They happen to be graduating at a time of increased unemployment and an inability, as Kareem said, of getting, and not just academic jobs, but really any job, is incredibly challenging. And so those payments end up getting delayed. Most of the time people have multiple loans. In terms of, I can talk plenty about student loan servicing, which is a rigged game. If you have a loan at 4% and then you have another one at 6%, another one at 8%, try paying off your 8% loan first. Yeah, it's not even possible, really. So there are a number of issues there, and so I think, and certainly the UC and public universities in general, which do receive a lot of their support from the public sector and from government, I mean, for-profit colleges are a much bigger problem in the student debt crisis than public universities are. But
can you talk a little more about that?
Sure.
The fact that we've got all these for-profits out there that are recruiting people with big promises and
yeah, I mean, for-profit colleges are essentially an extractive industry that is essentially taking money from the government, taking money from the federal student loan system, and handing out worthless pieces of paper to students in the form of diplomas that really acquire them nothing in terms of career opportunities or even skills. There was an attempt on the part of the Obama administration to crack down on for-profit colleges and have something called the gainful employment rule, which would make for-profit colleges ineligible for financial aid support if they did not just graduated a certain number of their students, but put them actually into employment. And that was overturned by the DC Court of Appeals So it requires congressional action, and that's definitely a good place to start. I do think a good place to start this, a good place to talk about in this conversation is about modes of changing how we finance that even if it's a small segment of the total education, how we do the financing for that. There's a program, a pilot program out of Oregon, which is called Pay It Forward, which is essentially an income-based repayment plan. You get to go to college debt-free, and then for a certain period after that, you pay a percentage of your income. So if you don't make a lot of money, it's a smaller percentage, and if you happen to be fortunate enough to make a lot of money, it's a larger percentage. It's larger raw dollars. It's the same percentage of income. And that goes into a fund to pay for the next generation of students. So that's an innovative example of how to do the financing. There's a federal income-based repayment program that works in a very similar fashion. But I do think that because of the clear challenges, challenges to our economy of financing even a portion of our college education in this manner, and how it is actually damaging the economic potential of the country, we have to come up with a different way of doing it.
Kareem, I know you wanted to jump in.
Absolutely. I just had a couple things I wanted to bring up. The fair payback, I mean, the truth of the matter is that 6% is double what banks borrow at, and we're charging students double that in interest so that they can take out their loans to go to school.
It's 9 times.
Is it 9 times? Oh, I'm sorry. 9 times, okay. So, even better. 9 times what banks borrow at so that we can attend school. And really, there are students out there where they're refusing to go to school. They have to say no, and they have to delay their education for a couple of years because they can't afford it. And in the end, the way this system is set up, there have been a lot of issues where students, once they've waited a couple of years, they can no longer access their Cal Grants. There are issues in the fact that students can't access education, and that's just based on the price tag that we're placing on it. Another thing I wanted to bring up just in passing is the fact that the employee cost is a huge issue with the UC. That cost isn't at the blue-collar level. That cost is primarily an administrative load. That cost is in like 10 associate vice chancellors for every vice chancellor. That cost is in associate and exec level people making, for instance, President Napolitano making 3 times what she made at Homeland Security as UC president. And that's just in her annual salary. Okay, that's not with the workers who are at the base level who are struggling to make ends meet with families trying to put food on the table, and they're essentially out there trying to bargain for contracts, and they can't get any bargaining done because they're being told you're asking for too much when they're sitting at below $30,000 a year. So I think that was something important that I wanted to know.
Okay, Michele?
Wow, I kind of want to respond to like 5 different points. You know, I think what I struggle with when we have this conversation is that I feel like we talk about stuff in generalities in a way that I think can be very frustrating for young people. We already have a challenge in terms of young people, whether they think college is attainable or not. So I just wanted to address a couple things that David shared. You know, certainly I think we've had a really tough 6-year run, right, in terms of the recession. And the impact of the recession is especially hard on young people in terms of getting jobs. But the reality is, if you look at the data, folks with a college education are doing a lot better. You know, their employment rate is much better than that of someone with a high school diploma or less. So I kind of worry about sort of really broad statements about folks not being able to get a job and having all this debt. So I just wanted to make that point. I think on the for-profit colleges, you brought up a really important piece because it worries me tremendously in terms of what's happening in terms of debt. But I think we also have to acknowledge that part of why students are going to for-profit colleges is a frustration around how much time it's taking them to get something of value. And not all for-profits give valueless paper, right? So what is it that as a state we should be doing to make sure that students get something of value? and don't incur incredible debt while they're doing it. And I wanted to note that I think, you talked about nationally, what the president tried to do in terms of gainful employment to prevent sort of this for-profit gouging of students. But in California, the legislature actually 2 years ago passed, the most stringent rules against Cal Grant aid being awarded to for-profit colleges. And I think that's kind of, again, maybe a bright spot, right? In sort of all of this bad news is here in California, if your for-profit college has a horrible graduation rate, less than 30%, and a high loan default rate for their students, that student can't use that Cal Grant to go to that for-profit college. I think it's contingent upon all of us that the lobbying doesn't get so strong that that gets overturned in the future, but I think that's a really perfect example of how you stop bad players, right? And you allow good aid to go to good institutions. I think the question I have for all of you is the question I struggle with a lot, because we can talk about a free education, or we can talk even about Oregon's Pay It Forward plan. What's always at the back of my mind is that when there's limited resources, who is going to get shut out? So in Oregon's plan, my critique is, if the state has to put up all the cost up front by itself, I can almost guarantee you that they're going to say, this is going to be the maximum amount of students that we're going to serve. And so as someone that comes from a family where I'm the first that went to college, I really struggle with the reality that that's not realistic, and that I would rather have somebody have the opportunity to go. Yes, there has to be a balance between affordability, but let's not pretend that the access question doesn't impact, that sort of us providing all this aid isn't going to impact other students. There is a finite amount of resources, I think, in the real world. So I struggle with that question. I'd be interested in sort of everybody else's response to that. Because talking about raw numbers, California is spending more money on higher ed than it ever has. Proportionately, it's not. We are spending more on prisons. Well, we were spending more on higher ed again this year, thanks to Prop 30, and who knows now with the court decision on prisons. But there are more students. The population is enormous. There are more young people in California than there have been ever, right? And so, and the population is more diverse. So then the argument can also be made, are we are we not investing in sending more because the population is now different and more diverse? It doesn't look like it looked like in the 60s. So I think those are all important questions. I feel like sometimes when we say things very broadly, we kind of minimize, I think, very legitimate issues about funding and access that concern me.
Okay. Well, I think Michele makes an excellent point. In looking at the question of the cost of a college degree, one has to understand what does it cost to deliver that degree. Now, Kareem mentioned high administrative salaries. Yes, we have relatively high administrative salaries at some of the campuses. But you've got to understand what those salaries represent. Take the new president of the system, Janet Napolitano. Janet is going to manage an enterprise of 10 campuses, 5 medical centers and major hospitals, 220,000 students, and 160,000 employees. And we are paying that individual a little under $600,000 a year. That isn't really where the cost is. The cost is in the tens of thousands of professors we have to maintain the institution at the level that we want, and teaching assistants. It's also in the staff. Look, if we don't wrestle with how to lower the cost, then we're stuck with who's going to pay it. And the model that we see now is taxpayers pay a smaller portion and students pay a portion. We can't, I don't think it's fair to compare today's model to the 50s and 60s when it was essentially free. we can't go back to 1958 or 1963. That regime doesn't exist anymore. So we either have to adjust quality, and by doing so, I admit to you, we can lower costs, or we can turn to other funding sources, philanthropy, and we, in the past 6 years or so, turned to increasing student fees. They have increased, as I've said, they've doubled in the last 5-6 years. That's the reality of this. But I have to challenge Kareem and say, what is a college education worth? And who should get it? Are we going to then, come to a point where we start allocating who gets the college degree? Right now, any kid in California that wants to go to college can go. And if you don't have money, it's not an excuse, because resources are there. Now, you may not want to end up with loans. That's your choice. Now, I'll tell you that in the 8 years that I've been on board, I believe my colleagues have voted to increase student tuition and fees 6 out of the 8. And I opposed all of them but one. I had thought that if the institution were denied the opportunity to increase student fees, it would more aggressively turn to how to offer the same quality and maintain a more rational cost regime. My colleagues did not agree, and tuition was in fact increased. Now, the reality is, when the state withdrew $900 million a year in support, where would the institution turn to? Where was the money coming from? The taxpayers, when they passed Prop 13, made a decision about funding government, so that's an area. And yet we have more students wanting a UC education than we ever had. UCLA, this past admission season, received 100,000 applications for admission. And they can only take about 4,600 to 4,800 kids a year. Berkeley received about 55,000 to 60,000 applications. And that's true across all of the major campuses. Kids want to come. We don't have enough space to take everybody. But we are not allocating space based on ability to pay. That's the message I want to give everybody. We admit students based on their performance and their life stories. And once we admit them, then we turn to putting together the finances to allow them to attend. I think that's a very good thing.
All right, well, let's turn a little bit to the conversation about community colleges. So as it relates to this, because the numbers you were talking about refer to the freshman transfers. But we have a lot of students from SMC here, and I want to actually recognize 3 of the SMC board members who are here: Louise Jaffe, Susan Amanoff, and Nancy Greenstein. Really appreciate your being here. And right there in the middle, Richard Seville runs the head of the academic leader of the SMC. The Public Policy Institute, that's one of our co-sponsors, and helps to bring a lot of students here, so we really appreciate your presence. Michele, you've worked a lot in this area of looking at the critical role that community colleges play in terms of access to Cal State in particular, but also to UC. Can you talk a little about some of the critical barriers you see, why it is that so few of those students who go to community college wanting to transfer end up actually making it to a four-year institution, and some of the things we should be, the folks in the audience might not understand or know about the role that community colleges play in the four-year college degree business?
Well, it sounds like you have some amazing people in the audience that could probably speak to this better even than I could. But I'll start by saying that, I think part of our conversation earlier, Ben, was too about A lot of times when we talk about college opportunity or college aid, we zero in on four-year universities, and often the conversation is definitely centered around the UC. I think we're certainly as a state super proud of the fact that we run the best public university system in the world, I would say. But the majority of our students go to community college. You know, in terms of where students in California go, they're going to California community colleges. Many times it is because of affordability, because they really see that as their only opportunity. So one of the things we haven't raised at all is that, you know, sometimes you do have students that get into a UC campus, but regardless of the aid package that they get, still feel it's unattainable or unaffordable and think it'll be better for them to start at a community college. Or maybe they're not ready to go to a four-year university, or they want to get training that's specialized that community colleges offer in terms of most of our health professions and a lot of our technical degrees can be had at a community college. And they're also everywhere. So 112 across the state of California. That means that almost in everybody's backyard there's a community college near you. And I think those of us who've had experience with community college know that some of the most amazing teaching is happening there as well. So that's why I think many of us feel like community colleges often don't get enough attention. You know, as a person, as a Latina, as a first-generation college goer too, it's very clear. You know, the majority of Latino students that get a four-year bachelor's degree started at a community college. So when we talk about diversity in our own state, we need to pay attention. I think that the perception is that because fees are so low, that it's affordable, and it doesn't get to the cost of living issue. Regardless of whether you go to UC or Cal State, you still have the full cost of whatever it is. You know, you have to pay the rent, you have to, you know, buy food, you have to drive, you have to take the bus, whatever it is. And our student aid system does not take that into consideration. So one of the things that we've been trying to advocate on the Student Aid Commission is expansion of the Cal Grant B, which is the award that actually is provided to community college students. Senator Kevin DeLeon sponsored legislation. It got to the governor's desk. It was vetoed over a technical glitch. We think it'll be reintroduced. This will increase the Cal Grant B award for students that are at community college significantly. It hasn't risen in over 10 years. That's unacceptable, I think. And actually there's a chart that, you know, I have here. There's like these 3 donuts. And when you look at financial aid in the state of California, even though the majority of students go to a community college, so that's this donut, the orange here, you can see in the middle the number of Cal Grants that they get is only 30%. And then the dollars in terms of Cal Grants, only 6%. So there's a real disparity in terms of our own kind of, you know, some of that is because it's tied to fees. So if fees are low, of course Cal Grant's going to match that, it's going to be low. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be advocating or advancing adequate financial aid is what I would call for community college students. And then I can also be very critical about community colleges in terms of completion and support services, and much of that is because they certainly get less state funding, but also I think regardless, we need to make sure to push community colleges to do a better job at getting students in and through the system. There is a real cost for students when they don't complete, and unfortunately, more than half of students that start at a community college don't, on average, across the state of California. So again, I think there's a lot of challenges. Part of that's why we've been pushing around trying to improve the transfer pathway. So some colleges do a great job at helping students transfer to the four-year university. Others do not. Trying to close the equity gap. If you're Latino, African American, you go to community college, your chance of completing is less than 25% after 6 years. I think that's not acceptable. So there are a lot of challenges. Affordability is one of them, but really making sure that we focus not just on access, but on getting students through is the other one.
Okay, I'd like to see if there's some folks in the audience who now want to ask some questions or participate in the discussion, and we can kind of continue from here. So, and Ken, we're going to want some thoughts from you at some point from your seat as an alumni Regent. All right, so Patricia Hoffman, our former local school board president.
Yeah, I don't even understand why we're still calling the UCs the universities of California when the state is paying, I believe, something like 12% of the cost, 18%, somebody saying, and I was a beneficiary of the time when the universities were free. There is an answer, and it's a simple answer that our state won't face. We can afford to fully implement the master plan and give free education to all California students if we'd only pay the taxes that we should on the educations that we benefited from in the 60s. So I think that, my question is that I haven't, other than the student, and I think we should sign on to the student initiatives that are tax initiatives, is that we as adults have to recognize our responsibility, and why isn't there more discussion coming from, a Regent's initiative or any other, why aren't the rest of you having the same kind of initiative to raise taxes?
Can I quickly address that? I mean, you talked about, we have this barrier that in the 70s there was a decision made and taxation was put at a lower level. I do have to challenge the idea that that's a static barrier. I mean, I'm so old that I remember 3 years ago when it was doctrinal that California could not pass a tax measure at the ballot box. But lo and behold, we did. I remember, I'm so old that I remember that it was doctrinal that there was no way that Democrats could ever get a 2/3 majority and be able to pass tax measures on their own. And so it is true that Kareem has identified a number of funding sources. That doesn't necessarily translate at a dollar level to a universal system of free higher education, but it could, if channeled properly, translate perhaps to some system with a public option type of model, where you use the community colleges, which are doing a very good job, and expand affordability at that level. So, and I think the Cal Grant program, the idea of using that towards regular expenses is a fantastic idea. I mean, one of the reasons that it is cheaper is it's so plentiful. They're everywhere, and so they can be community colleges. But those are still significant costs. And the idea that we can use the Cal Grant program to offset those is great. And we have the ability. One of the biggest reasons why both that tax measure and the legislative makeup occurred is through student organizing. That was probably the most consistent pathway to bring in new voters and pass those measures. So I think Patricia is on point.
I was wondering if you could kindly please address.
We're going to stand up so we can make sure everyone can
You
hear.
can repeat my question.
Okay, all right, we'll do the question.
I was wondering if you could kindly please address the middle class group. The high class can afford it. The low income class, they have a lot of, forgive me for the generalization, but there's a lot of substantial financial aid available for them to qualify. So if you're making about $50,000 a year, even if you're making $60,000 or $70,000 a year for a family of four, you're kind of stuck. I myself, I still owe $50,000 of student loan. I'll be 75 when I write my last check, and my daughter is applying to college next year. So it looks like the loop is starting. So I'm concerned about if you could address the middle class.
So I'll just repeat back so everyone can hear. Great question about the middle class. There are obviously those who have the resources for whom ups and downs in the tuition don't really matter because they're wealthy. There are those who are eligible for these various financial aid opportunities that are specifically targeted toward those with the least amount of resources. And then there's a big chunk of folks in the middle who may not be eligible for these kinds of opportunities, but for whom the ever-increasing tuition is becoming a real burden. And she was mentioning that she actually has $60,000 worth of loans and now has her own kid about to go to college and is struggling with how to figure all that out. So this is a big issue that a lot of people are struggling with, and I'm sure the members of the panel have a lot of thoughts on this. Who wants to start?
Well, I think it's a false sort of contest whether or not the middle class have it worse than the low income students, because I think if you actually look at the data, even our Cal Grant aid, only fulfills the need of 23% of the neediest students in California. So I think it's the better question I would say is around how do we make sure that there is affordability for everyone that's not rich, right? That can't afford it. Because there are a lot of low-income students that either will choose not to go to college because they don't realize that there's actually any aid for them, even if they have a full ride, or will still think it's not going to be enough for them to cover their aid. And there's studies that have confirmed that actually A+ students that are low-income have about as much of a likelihood of going to a good college as a C- student that is middle class or upper middle class. And I think to me that's so disturbing, right? Because we think about our core value is that anybody can go, and that's so American, right? That income shouldn't ever matter. But last year the middle class scholarship was passed in California, so I think there has been a lot of attention in the legislature around aid. And expanding aid, and I suspect that next year we'll continue to have that kind of attention. The middle class scholarship provides a rebate in terms of tuition and fees for families making up to $150,000. And I think our UC Regent Eddie Island talked about there's a huge amount of aid that's packaged within each system too, from the UC and the CSU. Again, that's not the case for community colleges. The middle class scholarship left out community colleges, in fact. So there's still a lot of shortcomings.
But I think, Michele, the questioner raises a very serious point. That is, until the recent action of the legislature passed the middle class scholarship funding scheme, it's true that if you are from a family of over 100 and about $115,000-$20,000, you didn't get any grants. But you could borrow money, and your parents could borrow money. Now, the difference in a kid growing up in a family of 150,000 and a kid growing up in a home where the income is 40,000 is tremendous. And the resources available to, intellectual resources available to the kid that comes to either UC as Cal State or community college vary tremendously as a result of family income. We've tried to address some of that. We're looking, and we passed what we call a blue and gold plan, which right now provides grants to students from families up to $80,000, and we recently expanded that to about $90,000. If you're in a family of four and your parents have a mortgage and both parents work and 2 cars and all the other expenses of raising children and living in California, you frankly don't have a lot of money left to send kids to college, and you'll end up having to borrow. One additional factor I want to throw out, and it touches on the question of affordability for low income. UC waives tuition for any student whose family income is less than $40,000 a year. They pay no tuition, 0. But there are the living expenses, and those living expenses are covered substantially by grants. Pell Grant, Cal Grant, and then the UC aid program. Students still ends up having to, through work study and other resources, come up with some funding. This is not easy to do, and it doesn't mean, and I agree with David, that it doesn't mean that this is all static. It can change. It can change through activism and commitment to change. But the current system is a tough one. But as I said, the mission of the land-grant institution, which is what UC is to educate a broad cross-section of all of California students. But let's focus on then and now. In 1970, UC's Caucasian student population was roughly 71%. Today, that Caucasian student population is 27%. Today, 52% of young people graduating from California high schools are Latino students. 11% are Asian Americans, and about 7% are African Americans. And then you overlay the politics on that. If you look at who votes in this state, while Latinos are roughly 34% of the state's population, they're only 19% of voters. That has an impact on what gets passed out of Sacramento. And that also is a factor to consider.
We've got two anxious questioners in the back, so you sir, then you, and we'll flip the next two.
Okay, I have like 3 questions, and I know it may take a little time, but
Let's
it's
go
killing
for
me. So,
Let's do it.
the first one's almost a comment, just about community colleges in general. I go to SMC right now, and you know, I enjoy it. It's a good experience, but there are a lot of problems, and I think a lot of them are fixable in a way. And one of them, of course, is parking. If you can't get to class, then how are you supposed to go to the class? You know, if you can't park your car, that's one problem. Another problem is, I'm sorry if there's anybody in the SMC counseling department, but to be frank, you guys are terrible. Terrible, terrible, terrible. So, yeah, please. And I'm sorry, I'm just going to be frank about it, because if you can't get the right classes, then how are you supposed to graduate? How are you supposed to transfer? You know, and these guys don't care at all. At all. Yeah, I mean, come on. They don't, like, there's an exception, of course. There's an exception to everything. But at the same time, when you go in there and you say, are these the right classes? And they tell you, yeah, go for it. And then you go and you look at the USC transfer articulation, and they're all wrong. I mean, that's ridiculous. We didn't change this. And another thing is, thankfully, I have a great professor, and Professor DeVilder, and great professor, he actually cares. I'll tell you, there's a good amount of community college, especially at SMC, teachers who are not very good. They're not very good, and they're on tenure. So, I mean, I may get flack for this, but it's honest. I mean, why not do something about this? I'm a supporter of teacher unions, but come on, the tenure is ridiculous. Teachers stay and they're terrible. So I think there's a lot of problems that you guys could easily fix, and that's just one comment. And then I have a couple questions. Okay, I have a couple questions. Okay, this one is directed to Kareem and David. So you guys talked about how it's hard to get a good job coming out of the UC system. And so I was going to go to UCLA, but I've been on the edge recently because although, yeah, for-profit colleges, as David said, a lot of them are just go there and you get a worthless piece of paper and you pay 3 times as much. But at the same token, I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I don't know the exact statistics, but just from people I know and people I've talked to, coming out of a school like UCLA versus USC, even though you're paying more, at least you're getting the connections that you need to get to these good colleges, to these good jobs. So my question basically is, even though it's a little more expensive, I'm just talking about Southern California, not nationally, wouldn't it be more worth it to go to a school like USC when you're going to have connections to get a good job rather than go to UC, which is fully worthless?
As a Bruin.
I wouldn't take a little bit of that. No, I think.
No, I think you're raising a good point around, like, you're talking about, you know, money, like, it being cheap isn't always, like, the end goal, right? So, you're raising a decent point. I don't think if you get a UC degree or a USC degree, either is going to be worthless, one. But two, I think kind of when we talk about scale, like our private colleges and universities like USC aren't going to be able to serve the number of students we need them to serve. And that's why our public universities and colleges are so critical, right? there's very few spots we think there's too few spots at UC. Well, there's even fewer at USC.
And yeah, I mean, I think we can all stipulate very easily on this panel that college is a good bet. I mean, it's something that will certainly, if you look at the economic statistics, I believe you mentioned $1 million over the course of your lifetime, and even people who take some college, who actually drop out after 1 or 2 years, also see improved financial career paths relative to people that don't, go to college at all. And that's the problem. I mean, that's the fact that it is such a promise is why people go to whatever lengths possible to recognize that and realize that. And that's when we get into this financing issue, which can be, I believe, much better managed, because ultimately it's an investment in the future, and that's how we have to look at
I'm
it.
sorry, I have one more question.
I forgot about 3.
So, just one thing I want to clarify. Let's do this. Let's move on to the next couple questions, then we'll go back to you. Okay, it's time.
But
One thing I do want to clarify is when he was talking about for-profit colleges, he's not talking about private colleges. For-profit colleges are a subset of private colleges.
I'm talking about like the University of Phoenix.
University of Phoenix, those sorts of
I'm
schools.
talking about USC.
USC is a private college, but it's actually a nonprofit.
Nonprofit.
It's not there to make money for its investors or its shareholders. Okay, so we'll hear from you, and then we'll go to Richard and Sue.
Well, 2 small things. One is financial aid abuse at the schools, and the other one are the prerequisites needed in order to pass your courses. From the prerequisites, from what I see in certain instances, it's trying to keep us back at the community college level, not letting us progress into the higher division courses. For whatever the reason may be, I don't know. I understand there's some basic knowledge that you must have in order to succeed. However, that's one thing that I've seen that's pretty troublesome. And the second is the financial aid abuse. The resources, as you've all stated, are there. There's generous amounts being provided through the UCs, through scholarships, through whomever they're being provided. However, when either the middle class or certain gaps that fall through these systems that aren't eligible for this aid, they fall victim to that. And the other thing is, sometimes you'll see many kids, this is my 3rd college I've been to. I've been to Valley College, Pierce College, and I'm at Santa Monica. All because, from what I've noticed as a student, these public colleges have become a business among the students. If you've noticed, or I don't know if you know or not, but trying to get a class is almost nearly impossible if you're not part of a program. So what I've had to do in certain instances is have to pay my way to buy an ad code from another student to get into a class. Because we don't have enough professors, like Professor Jeswin, who says, you know what, my limit is only 45, but I'm going to let you in my class because I care about my students. I don't know his situation of employment or not, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot like that, but teachers, from my opinion, don't get paid more money for accepting more kids into their class. After a certain cap, they can say, you know what, I don't need you in my class. I've met my cap, you don't need to be in my class, I'm full. Some teachers say, no adding, and they put a sign on their door. And that's one thing, and the thing is, you'll see a kid, 19, 20 years old, driving a Mercedes-Benz, $60,000, $70,000 car, right? How are you paying for that car? And they live on Rodeo Drive, Canyon Drive, you name it, on beautiful, top-notch streets in LA. And because mommy and daddy have found a loophole through their tax attorney that qualifies them to allow them to get this financial aid to pay for their beautiful car. And so it's like, it's a bad example, but you'll probably understand what I'm trying to get at. The world has enough food to supply everyone. There's no need of world hunger per se. However, a big population of our world is dying of hunger. But with education, there's enough money, there really is, to go around for everyone. But because of the fraud and the abuse that's going on, or people that aren't even going to school because they want the education, because they have too much time on their hands, or because they want the money and they can qualify for it when their spouse or someone else can afford to put them. It's a money, it's a business. And rather than cracking down on that, too much time is being spent on trying to allocate money elsewhere.
So I can touch a little bit on this as I've seen it. I live about 1.5 miles away from a community college. I commute about a half hour to get to UC Riverside. There is a lot of issues with the current situation. There's students, and I've hear these stories all the time, of students who essentially apply for financial aid, they show up to class for the first 3 days, and then they stop showing up because guess what, they have their check in their back pocket and they can walk away. So there's one problem as far as the financial aid abuse. I think you're absolutely right that that's something that needs to be addressed, that students are walking away. Students are taking money to walk away from classes just because it's better than trying to get a job. There's the other issue is trying to find these classes. I think you have an absolute point. I think there's a lot of very qualified and fantastic teachers in the community college system. Across the board, I've heard stories of amazing, amazing professors, in many cases sometimes better than those that exist at the UC. But the problem is there's so many people trying to get into these classes. People get stuck in what should be a 2-year term, staying for 6 years. Right? And I think part of the problem goes back to the question I was posed earlier, is how do we start fixing the counselors and the groups who are supposed to really be mentoring these students to force the system where students can actually win. So it's not, I'm going to dogpile on top of everyone else, hope I'm the one who grabs the class, enrollment slip, and see what happens. I tried helping a neighbor of mine enroll in a class at community college. It was 30 seconds past enrollment period. The class was already filled and the wait list was full. Like, it was to the point where there was 100 seats in the class, there was already 100 people plus 50 people on a wait list. 30 seconds after they opened up the enrollment. How do you succeed in that? Okay, and then half of these students, guess what? They decide to leave a couple weeks later because they get to pocket the money. I think there's a lot of change that needs to be made. What I would suggest, and I don't know how connected you are, there's a group called the SSCCC, which is the Student Senate of the California Community Colleges. They're essentially my counterpart, UCSA's counterpart for the community colleges, and they do a lot of work around these kind of issues and try to reform this kind of situation. So I think it would be a great place for you to try to voice your concerns.
I think it's important that we have to advocate for more funding for courses. I mean, that's the bottom line. Course access has been significantly cut across the community college system. The estimates are over 500,000 students are in that position where they can't get a class. And that is about funding. And, Prop 30 to some extent is restoring, previous cuts, but it's not restoring to what the demand or the need is. And I don't think there's sufficient outrage or attention in Sacramento about providing significantly more funding. So I would say, one is you have to advocate for more funding, and then there has to be incentives to really support students once they're in there, including the counseling issue that you raised earlier.
Ben, Karim raised a point that we've not really touched on, Michele just did now, and that is the time to graduation. About 60% of students that attend UC graduate within 4 years. About 20% within 5 years. And a significant number, 6 years. Now, why is that? You touched on availability of classes. That's one cause. But there are other causes as well. Take, for example, a lot of students come to the university without all the academic resources that some other students perhaps had. So they've had to invest time and effort in remedial classes. That takes time. We have students who work. And we try and discourage students from working more than 20 hours a week. Some students work 30, 35 hours a week. And believe it or not, they take some of the money they earn and they send it home to take care of their families. That's part of this dynamic as well. So class availability, students needing some remedial assistance, students having to work long hours, all of these things factor in time to graduation.
If Karim wanted to make a quick comment, then we'll hear from Susan and Regent.
I'll bring it.
Okay.
So I'd like to just turn our attention to something that's a little more systemic, and that is the idea that banks are making 6% on student loans, 4% on mortgage loans. So maybe, there is something to this, and the liquidity in the system right now is perhaps causing, the money supply is there because the banks are doing the lending at this 6%. So the money supply is there feeding the tuition rising. So I wonder if anybody, if anybody can comment on that or see the relationship between the supply of money and the increasing tuition. Perhaps not particularly at UC, but certainly in the private colleges in California.
I mean, I can talk about the federal level. I would like to say it's banks, but actually private student lending is going way, 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 way down. It's the federal student loan program that has exploded. As part of actually the Affordable Care Act, there was an effort to take the middleman, the banks, out of the federal student loan process and to directly lend to students, saving about $100 billion or so. And so the federal government is the primary student lender at this point. And it has created a situation where, by some estimates, over a 10-year period, the federal government makes something on the order of $158 billion off of student loans directly. And you also have a situation where while the federal government is doing the lending, there are still servicers, the people who process the payments, who are people like Sallie Mae, or even banks, Discover and JP Morgan Chase and some others. And Consumer Financial Protection Bureau has noted several problems with student loan servicing, particularly the transfer of student loans. When you try to pay off your loans early, you can't do it. And they don't tell you about affordable options, things like that. So it's really the federal government, when you're talking about this supply of money and who is benefiting.
So do you see a relationship between that supply of money and increasing tuition?
Well, that's a very good point, and a lot of people do make the point that if you create a situation where anyone can get a student loan to finance education, then you create this kind of vicious cycle where tuition goes up because there's a steady market for it. I mean, I think that's certainly the case in the for-profit space. A little less so, obviously, in the public realm, where state funding and federal funding, to an extent, is part of the equation. But it is something that I think we have to consider, and that's why considering this financing system and ways to better manage it would, I think, go a certain way to alleviating that.
We've got to start winding down. So Richard, and then Shai, and then we got.
So I have my name is Richard. I have a comment and then a comment. Maybe then I'll frame it as a question. But I would first like to say that Dara is a student of mine, and he's made it very difficult for me sitting between the chair and the vice chair and another member of the Board of Trustees and my union representation at Santa Monica College.
Being honest.
Well, I want to say that I don't sell ad codes for my class, but fairness. And I think one thing that needs to be, and I know you're a good student, and so I think you are committed to this notion of fairness. And out of fairness, when we look at the amount of money that the state contributes per full-time student at the different systems in our state, what we're doing at the California Community College, counselors, teachers, administrators, staff, is remarkable considering the fraction of what we get compared to CSU and UC. That needs to be known. And then the commitment of Santa Monica College to backfill from reserves for those counseling services and the things during this Great Recession. When I tell my students to look at the long self and to see what the commitments are, to delve deep and recognize what's happening there, it won't take you much, brother, to figure out that the commitment of the staff, the administrators, everybody involved at SMC has done extraordinary things to keep the boat afloat. Remarkable things. So I have to defend my school. And then, secondly, we can all, it's interesting that particularly Democrats, which I am one, seem like we like to eat each other up. We like to consume one another as we're cannibals. The fact of the matter is, David's made a good point that, we are old enough to know that things have changed politically in the state. And I served for about 6 years' time as a leader of the faculty at SMC, and served for a while on the siloed quasi-siloed committee between CSU, the California Community College Academic Senate, and the UC, in an attempt to reimagine and rethink the master plan for California education. We need to quit throwing stones and being silos and saying, you know, that it's this group or it's that group or it's bad teacher, or it's this union or it's that, it's the administrators are making too much money. We need to demonstrate that we are these educated people and have the benefit of that public education. And if we have the political muscle that we do now, we need to lead that reimagination. That's what has to happen. Dr. Island's absolutely right, or Mr. Island, forgive me, I don't know. The thing is, we can't go back to 1958 or to 1963. I don't want to. I'm not from that time. We need to re-articulate the contract together now. That's what we have to do. And so I think our time would be best served at how we're going to blaze that path, blaze that trail, and come together with our 2/3 majority in the state of California and say, this is the place where it's going to happen. This is where we're going to reimagine for the next 50 years what education is going to look like. And just to throw down for the community colleges, we're in the frickin' trenches. We're the ones in the trenches. Thank you.
All right, Shai, last comment, and we have to we need to wrap up.
I can't beat that. But,
Okay.
Really quickly, so the British education system presents sort of an accelerated model where people go into some sort of track straight out of high school, and that comes at a cost of a broad liberal arts education that most of us are beneficiaries of, including myself, in this country. Is it possible to have more accelerated programs, like, for example, an engineering track or a medical track straight out of high school? And some other states do this and shorten the amount of years it takes to get to where you want to go at the cost of a liberal arts education. But would that be a cost-effective solution to reducing the number of school years that are needed to get to the job that you want?
Well, that's been looked at and thought about and talked about and written about. In higher education in this country, there is great attachment, great affection for the liberal arts curriculum. That its role is not only to prepare you for a job, a career, but to make you a better human being. And so there's a great debate around the issue that you raised, that we could dispense with a lot of it and go straight into various career paths. I don't have the right answer to that. I had thought you were going to raise a slightly different point, which is that perhaps a lot of what we do could be channeled into direct preparation for jobs. We don't generally do that. Even in our law schools and medical schools, we don't prepare people who can come right out and be an experienced lawyer, be a doctor that you want to go to. Additional substantial training after graduation. So, but some countries do have that model. Germany being one of them.
All right. Unfortunately, the library shuts us down, so I want to just thank our excellent panels for tonight, your insights and thoughts. I also want to take a couple of minutes to thank a couple of some of the folks from the Democratic Club who worked really hard to help pull this together. Shai and Janice, Julie, Bill, Marianne, Patricia, Peter, Jay, and a whole set of others for your insights, for helping to think about the panel and organize this event. It's really been fantastic and a real pleasure for me to moderate. I really appreciate you all being here. Thank you.